Everyone for coming today. I'd like to just start off with our acknowledgement of country. So as members of the Charles Sturt University community, we acknowledge the words of the Wiradjuri people on whose university or whose land our university was founded and share their aspiration of Yindamara Wananana, the aim for us all to learn the wisdom of respectfully living well in a land worth living in. And I'd like to pay my respect to the traditional custodians of the lands where I live and work. That's the Gadigal and Birrabirragal people. And I also extend that respect to any First Nations peoples present here today. I am Casey Garrison. I'm a senior lecturer and the associate head of school for research in the School of Information and Communication Studies at Charles Sturt University. I encourage you to introduce yourselves and share your country or location in the chat as well. So yes, good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you're joining us today. And I know we are kind of global today, so that's fabulous. Thank you so much for coming to our final lecture in our public lecture series that we've had this year, celebrating our 50 years and beyond of the School of Information and Communication Studies at Charles Sturt University. And through this series, we've heard from Emeritus Professor Gary Marchionini from the University of North Carolina in the US talk about library and information science issues and research for the first quarter of the century. That was back in February. Then Professor Emerita Diane Oberg from the University of Alberta in Canada shared a teacher librarianship research perspective with our synergies across the Pacific. And Diane's here. So thanks so much, Diane, for coming back. And then Professor Terry Flew from the University of Sydney spoke about AI and communications research in our third lecture in August. And now our final lecturer, Dr. Gillian Oliver from Monash University, is going to take a historical view at the evolving educational landscape in archival science across the Tasman Sea. And just before we get to Gillian, some quick housekeeping. So Gillian's going to present first, so please stay on mute throughout that. And feel free to add comments to the chat. We do have the Q&A open, so if you'd like to ask Gillian some questions for after the presentation, please pop those into the Q&A. And then we'll also be sharing the recording link to this lecture on our 6 YouTube channel, hopefully by the end of the day, if the technology continues to be amazing. Yes, so now to Dr. Gillian Oliver, who is Adjunct Research Professor and Co-Director of the Information Empowered Communities Lab at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. She's currently the chair of the Global iSchools organization. Her disciplinary background includes archival science with a specific focus on information and data cultures. And she is the author of 4 books and over 100 journal and conference publications. So with that, I will hand over to you, Gillian.
Thanks very much, Casey. And thank you, Charles Sturt, for the invitation to take part and to deliver this lecture. So it's a great honour to be invited to do this and to be in such illustrious company. And congratulations for the 50 years. So this presentation, I've sort of divided it into 4 main parts. Now, they're not equal sizes, though. The first 2 parts provide some history and context. And then in the third part, give consideration to what's happening now and why, and then finish up with my vision, what needs to be done for the future survival of our disciplines. So my specific focus is on the frequently overlooked and underappreciated area of education for current record keeping. Now, first test, move the slides along. Right. So I'm actually in Melbourne for a change. So I'll begin with an acknowledgement of country. So we recognise that our campuses are located on the unceded lands of the people of the Kulin Nations, and so I pay tribute to their elders past and present, and also acknowledge those Indigenous people who are here with us now. So I want to begin with a student perspective, and it's my perspective. So this is my own educational journey, which started, I really feel quite embarrassed to say this, about 50 years ago. So timing wise, it's very appropriate for this presentation, because thinking about it, preparing for this lecture, I realised that those experiences really shape my view that I've taken forward into sort of my perceptions of the education landscape and sort of the ideal scenarios. So the story begins in London in the 1970s. I finished school with a love of languages. I did German, French and Italian at A-level. Absolute fear of science and numbers. I was, convinced I couldn't play any role in that area at all. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was really clear about one thing that I didn't want to do, and that was to teach, because I thought that was just a dreadful future. So I had these languages, but I wasn't sure which career they'd be useful in. Fortunately, there was a position advertised for a library assistant in a postgraduate research institute of the University of London, the Institute of Ophthalmology, and that attracted my attention because it needed language skills. They wanted somebody who could translate scientific abstracts from French and German. So that caught my eye and I applied and I was successful. And in that role, it was a small sort of one-person library set up, providing information to scientists, research scientists, and that really opened my mind to the power of information. And there I was contributing to an area that was at the forefront of science and learning that I did have something that I could contribute, something really important, an important role that could be played. So then I thought, okay, I found what I wanted to do. So I should get a qualification because this is the area that I want to stay in. And I certainly didn't think about a master's degree because I wanted to get a qualification as quickly as possible. The master's degree seemed a long way away. So there was an undergraduate degree offered in London at Polytechnic of North London. It was an honours degree, so I spent 4 years there in the end. And it seemed to be essential, but the areas covered really didn't seem relevant to the sort of work that I was doing in this specialist library. The bits that I enjoyed most in that degree that I remember and that I've kept the materials from were the 2 electives, one of which was studying Russian and the other one studying Chinese. So they were the bits that I really enjoyed. If I hadn't had that work experience, I doubt whether the qualification would have encouraged me or inspired me to stay in the library area, pursuing that direction. So in the 1980s, I moved to Germany. And so this really was my first post-qualification role. So initially I had a job as a translator for the US Army, Corps of Engineers. But luckily that didn't last very long because there was an opening for a qualified medical librarian at the 97th General Hospital in Frankfurt. So at that time, the US forces had bases throughout Europe and in Germany. The bases were often very large, so they were like small towns, and they had schools and hospitals. So this was at one of the largest hospitals in Germany. The vacancy was for a qualified librarian, and that was really important because the US Army hospitals were accredited by a civilian agency, which required the appointment of medical specialists. A medical library was categorized as a specialist area in the same way as pediatrics, dermatology, that sort of thing. So it was a wonderful opportunity for me. It was the first strategic role that I had. And in the 1980s, US military, this was when computers, desktop computers were coming in, and the military was at the forefront of developing the internet. So there were all sorts of resources, technologies available. It was a clinical setting, so the library served mainly healthcare providers, but also provided consumer health information for patients. It was very much a people-centered practice. And so on a daily basis, I experienced the importance of information for individuals. At the end of the 80s, I enrolled with support of the Army in a master's degree offered by the University of Wales. It was the MLib, but it was specifically focused on management. So it was management for librarians. It was a distance learning part-time offering. It was wonderful. Get cassette tapes every few weeks in the mail. And it was just really exciting and really relevant. The assessments were designed to be tailored to people's unique workplaces. So everything was relevant, and it felt like it was just really aimed at me, and I really enjoyed it. And thinking about it now in hindsight, I realized that one of the things that I found very stimulating was the interdisciplinarity of it all, because a lot of the readings were from other domains. They were from management, from IT, financial management, strategic planning. And it was just in the lectures that they were placed in sort of a library relevant setting. So in the 1990s, I moved to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and this opened up new pathways for me. They weren't the sort of positions available that were in any way equivalent to the experience that I'd had in Germany. Much smaller population, so limited job opportunities. So I had to start looking around to see, what else, where else I could contribute. And there was a position advertised in records management. Now, I had no idea what that was beyond perhaps something to do with filing cabinets. And archives were mentioned as well, and I didn't really know what that was. So I had 2 degrees in librarianship, but they provided me with 0 insight into the world of records and archives. So that's the sort of the first part. That's a student perspective. Now I'm switching to a provider view, so a shift in focus here. So this slide shows a timeline condensing the trials, tribulations, and success of developing library and information studies qualifications in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So 1940s, the New Zealand Library Certificate and the New Zealand Library Diploma were established. And they're the origins of the undergraduate and postgraduate qualifications offered today by the Open Polytechnic and Victoria University of Wellington, respectively. 1978, the Department of Librarianship was established at Victoria University of Wellington, and research degrees were offered for the first time. The 1990s, there was more positive development with the establishment of master's and bachelor's degrees qualifications. And as I said, today, there are 2 entry-level qualifications in New Zealand and 2 providers. Both of these qualifications are available nationwide, so they're not specifically focused on one very specific geographical centre. Now, looking at this more closely, this timeline shows what happened in archives and records management. And the focus here is really on attempts to establish archives and record keeping qualifications. Up until the 1980s, overseas study was the only option, either at University College London or University of New South Wales. So you can imagine there were just a very small number of people who had the resources or were supported to go overseas and study. There were formal recommendations made by visiting international experts with regard to archives education, but records management was regarded as a separate category requiring training only. So education wasn't needed. It was believed that training was necessary to ensure uniformity of practice. So at this time, there were attempts to establish records management as a separate profession, but these emphasised distinctions from archives and didn't identify any synergies. So any synergies would have been sort of sidelined. The focus was on what's different. And that was really ultimately detrimental to establishing a case for the viability of specialist qualifications, as numbers remained really low. And as we're all probably very aware, it's the numbers that are important, establishing a business case for qualifications. In the 1990s, there were some positive developments with the archives elective offered sporadically at Victoria University of Wellington. And there were some short-lived records management qualifications at polytechnics. But those records qualifications, they really didn't last long because of the numbers, a few years in most cases. In 1994, another visiting expert, Gerald Ham from the United States, came to New Zealand and issued a major report. Findings from that were that archives required a postgraduate certificate, but records management, yes, it needed a certificate, but it only need be at undergraduate level only. It wasn't significant enough to warrant study at postgraduate level. So that was the sort of 1990s situation, and that report, I think, really stopped things for a bit. But Into the 2000s, postgraduate diploma and postgraduate certificate in archives and records management was established at Victoria University of Wellington, and at the Open Polytechnic, an undergraduate records and information management qualification. It's really fascinating to read the discussion. There's lots of verbatim minutes of meetings that happened at the time that were published in the professional journals. And I love this particular quote. It's just one of many that I selected. So this was an observation made by Alan Richardson, referring to the single archives elective in the postgraduate diploma, postgraduate library diploma. I don't expect the archives elective option to be amongst the most popular offerings. Indeed, I'd wonder why many students wish to do this course. And so it sort of gives you a flavour of the attitudes that predominated then. The early 2000s were a time of optimism and hope. The future was looking really bright. The decades of debate, the quarrels about undergraduate, postgraduate, training, education seem to have been resolved, and brand new qualifications have been established. So we're thinking, yes, everything's going to progress from here. A high point was this new legislation. Sorry, I have my notes confused. The Public Records Act was issued in 2005. The predecessor for the Public Records Act was the Archives Act of 1957, and that focused on archives only. So it didn't address current record keeping at all. So after many attempts, there was this successful celebratory occasion when the Public Records Act was promulgated, and this legislation mandated the creation and maintenance of records by government departments, accompanied by an audit regime. So that seemed to be the sort of the most wonderful thing that could happen, and we expected that would lead to lots of new jobs being created, and then requirements for qualifications, so keeping those numbers healthy and being able to build up enrolments and contribute to the sustainability of programs and lead to sort of new developments, specialist qualifications. But it really didn't have the positive impact that I was expecting in terms of increasing demand for qualified archivists and records managers. So, considering why that was, we can shift perspective again and step back and analyse the situation from a societal perspective. So this is the third part now, where we think about the nature of professions. So the sociologist Andrew Abbott formulated a systems-based theory about the nature and development of professions, which can provide critical insight for future strategies. The central argument is that professions and occupations arise as a result of system disturbance or societal change and establish jurisdiction or ownership over particular problem areas. If this perspective is accepted, then we can shift our attention from a narrow and defensive view dominated by concerns about barriers to entry for a particular profession to a more proactive and agile positioning, responsive to the inevitable disturbances in society resulting from technological advancements. So no mistake about it, these changes, they're going to continue and continue and continue. So it's particularly clear in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, the impact of these system disturbances, because in our countries, the traditional information science professions of librarian, archivist, and records manager don't have formal legislative requirements to conform to particular standards. So responsiveness to societal developments, including the rapid change in terms of digital technologies and subsequent proliferation of data, are particularly significant. The prominence of data is characteristic of today's environment, but it's simply the latest instance of major system upheavals throughout the last century, influencing the profile and competencies of the information professions. So the Canadian archivist Shelley Sweeney has written about Andrew Abbott's theory and applied it to the development of our professions. And she writes that the system disturbance that created the library profession was the creation of public libraries and hence a demand for librarians. In the case of archivists, it was the creation of archives in response to an increased volume of material to preserve. And for records managers, it was a surge in records creation during and after the Second World War, as well as the drive for efficiency and economy in both the public and private sectors. And today, new system disturbances, data, new tech, media, AI, deepfakes, weaponization of information, of course, it goes on and on and on. So Andrew Abbott himself has written about the library profession in particular. So over 2 decades ago, he wrote that the most obvious and important change in society impacting on the library profession came from technology. He wrote, "To the profession as a whole, the central challenges lie in embracing the various information technologies of the future and the groups that service them. This embrace will end up redefining the profession, but that's necessary to survival." And at a similar point in time, 2 other authors, Van House and Sutton, argued that library and information science was engaged in a competition for jurisdiction with other information professions because of, not only because of technological advances, but also because of the increasing strategic importance of information in society more generally. So our response to all these system disturbances is critical to the continued existence of our professions. Response has to be visible not only in the content of our educational curricula, but also in how and when and in what form delivery of education takes place. So just thinking about records and archives in particular, from 2007 to 2010, there was a major research project in the United Kingdom, led by the University of Northumbria. So the aim of this project was to accelerate positive change in electronic records management. And among the project's key findings was this one. Records professionals may be part of the problem as well as part of the solution. E.g., they take the holistic view and have the principles and tools to manage records, but their demands may be unrealistic or too constraining. And that suggests to me, the connotations of that for me is that what we're doing in education is to continue to emphasize principles, standards, and tools when we educate students to the detriment of people. You know, we're not taking people into account. And just one last little bit of insight here. This is a more recent piece of evidence. So this was from a research project that we conducted 2024. We spoke to senior government managers in New Zealand about their ideal data culture, their ideal environment. And one person said to us, we hope for guidance about provenance and authenticity from our record staff. So this was in relation to data, but they said, no, wouldn't have a bar of it. It's outside their area. So this to me suggests that perhaps we're still stuck in a records management training mindset, and that our qualifications are embodying that ethos more. So, my vision for the future. So this is the sort of the final section now. You've had the historical context and sort of my view of what's been happening and why. And this is what I think we need to be doing about it. So there's two components to this. First of all, I'd make some small comments about the discipline itself, current record keeping, what I'd like to see happening there, and then about the overall information landscape. So records management needed a drastic overhaul to escape the analogue era and be fit for purpose in today's networked environment. So together with colleagues at Monash, we developed this new conceptual model, record keeping informatics. So the original design here was Frank Upwood, Barbara Reid, Joanne Evans, and myself at Monash. And subsequently, this is being further enriched by a team of international scholars to emphasize people rather than information object-centered practice. So the model consists of 2 building blocks and 3 facets for analysis. And so there's sort of 5 elements here, and these can provide a structure for a course outline. So the building blocks, continuum thinking indicates that the key areas underlying the records continuum model are critical in this new way forward. And they can be summarized as encouraging practitioners to see beyond the here and now and to have a future-focused mindset. Metadata, the other building block, is just there. We're saying it's so significant. You know, this has got to be a really key part of everything. There's no meaning without metadata. And the 3 facets for analysis refer to organisational and societal activities which need to be understood in order to achieve record-keeping objectives. So that's information culture, business processes, and access to information. So of those three, I'll just say a little bit more about information culture, because that may be it's probably the least familiar area. So information culture, this is where we deliberately prioritize people above information objects. So it prioritizes consideration of the people intertwined in record-keeping systems. That includes both internal perspectives from within the organization and external perspectives from the outside, from the clients or subjects of the records. So it refers to the values accorded to information and attitudes towards it, and they're the indicators of information culture. So these values and attitudes are likely to be shaped by interactions within and across the various layers of organisational culture. Organisational contexts are likely to be characterised by multiple information cultures. These information cultures, they might be contradictory. They're likely to be contradictory, and they may even be in conflict with one another. So analysing this area isn't necessarily about change, because some aspects can be changed, others can't. It's primarily about understanding the influences at play and navigating those accordingly. So in summary, the record-keeping informatics conceptual model can provide the basis for learning to facilitate a shift away from training, focused solely on standards and processes, and to enable people-centered practice. So how about the relationships between disciplines and competition for jurisdiction? Well, for a way forward, we can look at other professions. For example, medicine, right? So within the healthcare field, medicine, you've got a very diverse range of occupations, and patients will be referred as necessary between specialists. For these occupations, you're going to have different entry-level qualifications. The scope of specialisation is likely to be understood, might not be perfectly understood, but likely to be understood by colleagues and by patients. These occupations will have licensing requirements, and they'll all have ongoing professional development requirements. So have that in your mind, very clear delineation there of these different occupations involved. And think about the information landscape. As the importance of information as a strategic resource increases, I think that the specific knowledge and skills that information professionals bring to this space can be lost sight of, not only by others outside our domain, but also by practitioners themselves. So in some instances, the situation is compounded by professional associations, our professional associations, overclaiming the territory which their constituents own, instead of specifically promoting areas of unique expertise. The ideal for practitioners working within a broadly conceived information space would be a landscape of precisely defined specialists analogous to one of the traditional professions, such as medicine or law. So coming back to medicine for a moment, from a patient's perspective, a client's perspective, one starting point would be a general or family physician, and then depending on the problem, its severity and treatment regimen, the patient might be referred to a specialist such as a neurologist who may request diagnostic tests from a radiographer and so on. So the different occupations are brought in as necessary. And those specialists include so-called paraprofessionals and allied health practitioners such as nurse practitioners, pharmacists, physios, and administrators. So the important point is that the function and purpose of each role in the network is recognised by peers and is consulted and comes into play accordingly. So this isn't to deny that there's no internal competition for jurisdiction, say in medicine, but it does provide an example where there's an infinitely clearer distinction and understanding of the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved. So in our landscape, situation is very different and characterised by both internal and external competition for jurisdiction. We're used to talking about the others not understanding us, but internally, I don't think we have really sharp understanding of each other's contributions. And while we have that really sort of ambiguous environment, it doesn't provide a setting that will facilitate the recognition of the essential role of information professionals by society at large. So it can be argued that in a world where data and information can be deployed to achieve consequential outcomes, both positive and negative, establishing artificial demarcation lines between data and information, as one example, is short-sighted at best. So we need to provide learners with sophisticated and nuanced understanding of the diversity of information. I think we need to really work hard in the record-keeping domain in particular to promote awareness of the people dimension, and we need to help with this understanding of the specialist roles in the information landscape. We need to define clear pathways for entry and ongoing professional development. So 2019, I think both ALIA and ASA, so the Australian Library Association and Archives Association, conducted reviews of university education. Both reviews emphasised the need for non-traditional educational opportunities to supplement existing university-based curricula, and there seemed to be clear signalling of the changing nature of the relationship between professional accrediting bodies and university master's degree qualification. This reflects workplace realities, where employers aren't requiring applicants to hold recognised information qualifications. So the ALIA consultation document emphasised the need for micro-credentials, and I quote, to support non-LIS qualified personnel when they moved into the sector. Some of these newcomers already had qualifications in other disciplines, had been employed on the basis of their specific skills and expertise, and were expected to maintain currency in their own specialist area. And they expressed no interest in undertaking a full degree in library and information science. The alternative will be ceding territory to other occupations and becoming extinct. So my vision isn't that information professionals should have domain ownership of the entire data and information landscape, but we should have the breadth and depth of education to facilitate understanding of complex problem areas and the confidence of being able to articulate our own unique contribution in relation to other experts. And those other experts will include close colleagues, e.g. librarians, archivists, records managers, as well as the technical specialists. We must ensure education is relevant, flexible, and collaborative. Our challenge is to ensure that graduates have the knowledge, skills, and expertise to address the complexities of managing information, not only in today's network environment, but the confidence and ability to adapt to an unknown and unpredictable future. That requires our awareness of the influences that have shaped today's curricula, and those historical influences, they might still be there influencing sort of what happens and how things develop. And we need to be open to critical reflection on the ongoing competitions for jurisdiction that are occurring in our information landscape. We've got a long way to go, but to try to sum it up in one pithy sentence, few words, phrase, collaboration rather than competition is essential. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Gillian, for that insight. And yes, now we're open for questions. So feel free to go off the mic. There's about 20 of us here, so I think that's fine. Or you can type into the chat as well. Yeah, I was wondering about that prioritizing people over objects and promoting people. Do you have any practical ideas for oh, hey Diane, sorry. Didn't see your
No,
question.
I'm sure my question is going to follow up on yours, so go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering about practical kind of ideas for that in subjects, especially in archives being so focused on objects to a point. And I think sometimes students do get a bit kind of caught into what their expectations before going into a profession. So yeah, any practical thoughts on that, how to apply that in education?
So one thing that we've started to do in sort of working on the record keeping informatics model is to develop case studies and talk about scandals, information scandals that have major implications for the people concerned. So in Australia, things like Robodebt, you know, the big stuff, in the UK, post office. And it doesn't take a lot of work to highlight the people aspect and the consequences of the decisions that are made and the actions that are undertaken, or the fact that people haven't been taken into account. So that's the sort of case study I think we need to develop more of. And the other area is around this whole information culture area, sort of really focusing on people and really sort of addressing this point of, you know, the extent to which records professionals in not understanding, not being sensitive to the organisational context may be compounding problems rather than accelerating positive change, in the words of that research project.
Well, thank you so much, Gillian. I found some connections between the work in school libraries and the work that you're doing in your area. And one of the things that strikes me is I'll bet the students don't initially react positively to the news that you're bringing them with new theories. Has that been an experience, or are people quite comfortable with the change?
So information culture in particular, people really enjoy that because it provides insight into their own areas, and it's easy to sort of develop some examples and activities where you can see the different cultural influences at play. And that's always seemed to sort of like, oh, you know, you get those light bulb moments. And I hope for a lot of students, it will encourage them to continue in a records area, because otherwise, yeah, like I said, going into it, I thought, oh, it means filing cabinets and things. And, yeah.
I think there's some,
yeah,
there's some similarity in helping students to recognize that they're going to be planning with teachers in the school library setting, but that teachers plan in so many different ways. And one of the things you've got to figure out early is not only the culture of the school, but the individual practice and preferences of the teachers that you're going to work with. So prioritizing teachers is an incredibly critical thing for school librarians, and putting people first, as you mentioned, this certainly makes a big, big difference.
Because I think we can probably learn a lot from library education. And when we started looking at this area, I looked at research and sort of did a very non-scientific look at the literature, but looked at library research that was using ethnographic techniques. And then you look at the current record keeping, and sort of it just wasn't mentioned at all, that, you know, that perspective wasn't there. So I think we can sort of, you know, learn from other areas and sort of bring things a bit closer together.
And I love your example of what can go wrong, and giving them a scenario to really understand how important the work is.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks.
Oh, Tina.
Tina.
Thank you very much, Gillian, and I feel great talk. I'm very impressed when you mentioned education, information, education needs to be relevant, flexible, and collaborative. Given your international background, as you mentioned, in UK, Europe, New Zealand, Australia, and this in the past, but also your experience working with schools that's across many universities, multiple continents, across multiple continents. So can you please give a little bit more explanation of this relevance, flexible, and collaborative for Australian these areas in general, including archives discipline?
Yeah, so I mean, from a provider's perspective, it gets really difficult because I mean, earlier I was talking about the importance of numbers, and back when there was no archives qualification in New Zealand, one of the reasons for saying overseas study only and University of New South Wales being identified as a provider was to keep that course going, you know, to have a pool of numbers coming from New Zealand, and the thought that there weren't enough numbers to keep multiple courses going. So the sort of the viability aspect is always at the forefront of any discussion about collaboration. But I think we need to really look at what's being provided and look for areas where we can work together. I mean, I don't know whether WISE is still going. Spencer?
I believe that WISE is still going, but it's not as sort of high profile as it used to be, I think. Is probably the best way of describing it at the moment.
Because that, I thought, was a wonderful model where, you know, universities were collaborating with each other, and if somebody was running an elective that you didn't have the specialist staff to offer, then there would be those synergies, and that to me seemed ideal. So it's probably worth looking at sort of what's happened since then, and if that's faded away, why, and you know, whether that's something that can be revisited now.
Yeah, at the Rails conference a couple of weeks ago, the final panel, we talked about sorry, to double clicked, the closer cooperation between the 4 schools that are still surviving here in Australasia, and that was probably something that we could sort of look at in the future in terms of, but again, you know, we have to convince those higher up the food chain than us that's viable as well. So it's a discussion worth having, but we can't just make it happen overnight.
No.
Indeed. Thanks.
Diane?
I was always amazed that I could collaborate more effectively with CSU than I could with UBC in Canada, because I think universities, and this is a big part of our culture, are very competitive. They won't even, you know, in Canada, I can't even find out how many students they've got in a particular course, or what their plans are for the future. It's kind of a craziness. So collaboration, yes, we need a heck of a lot more collaboration in our field. Thanks, Joanne.
So personal relationships, they really count for a lot, don't they? It's building trust and between individuals, and then you can progress. Simon.
Hi there. How are we all?
Hello.
Good afternoon. Thank you for a wonderful lecture. That was really, really cool. So I've only been a teacher librarian now for 2 years. I'm working in a primary school in Sydney, on the northern beaches or North Shore. And my school's been very focused on the whole idea of collaboration and teachers working together. And I think what I'm doing is working, because I've been trying really hard to work closely with teachers in the different stages, and my principals just come to me talking to me about next year and me actually taking over a KLA for like stages 2 and 3, so like maybe history or science or geography or something like that. So I guess it's working for me here, but I'm interested with everything ever since I started doing the Masters of Teacher Librarianship at Charles Sturt. I think I'm interested to see what your opinion is on the rest of the world and this idea of collaboration. Where would you say you see the best collaboration on the planet? Like, is it here? Is it in America? Is it somewhere in Europe? Yeah.
I'd say the best collaboration is in Europe, European Union, because they've got this standardized metrics for the size of educational offerings, and a EU scale mechanism to swap credit from university to university. So I mean, that's the ideal, but I don't see how that level can be achieved with, you know, different governments. But if you've got that infrastructure, then that seems wonderful. That's the nirvana.
Europe's nirvana, right? I'll head over
They've
there.
got lots of other problems, but they got this. That's
They've got information library servicing down. That's excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for answering my question. I appreciate that.
Great. Well, we are at our hour, so there's no more questions. I'll just yeah, big thanks to you, Gillian, for presenting our last lecture and sharing your perspective with us. Lots to think about here. And yes, that's a wrap on the 6 Thoughts on the Beyond public lecture series. Thank you so much for supporting 6 this year and by participating in the series. And yes, we hope you have a happy and safe end of 2025 and start 2026. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.